Hello SGBers, I'm Companion Wolf, aka Rob on Facebook, and I'm bringing you another tutorial in a Smile Game Builder tutorial series. Note that because there's a lot to cover, this tutorial may go beyond my 20 to 30 minutes target range. I'd prefer not to split this particular one into parts if I can help it, but we'll see where it goes. Now for this week's tutorial, I'm focusing on event triggers. There appears to be a lot of confusion on the subject, notably with the auto-run and parallel events across maps. So, in this tutorial, I'm delving a little deeper to demonstrate how it all fits together. Each event needs a trigger to activate. This is the boring preamble, so if you want to skip ahead to the actual tutorial, you can click on the annotation or on the link in the description below. I already covered triggers briefly in previous tutorials, but I guess there's no harm in going through them again, this time more thoroughly. So, when the main hero talks, obviously when an action key is pressed to interact with the event, whatever is in the event details will trigger. Contact with the player is where an event touches the player. An example might be where an NPC approaches the player and as soon as he or she makes contact, the event is triggered. When making contact with the event is a bit of a strange one. It doesn't necessarily mean when one event collides with another event, but it can be manipulated to do so. That'll probably be for another tutorial because it's slightly more involved. Triggered automatically one time will only trigger once. If you plan on reusing a map, use a conditional local switch to turn it off because it'll trigger again each time the map is visited. Auto trigger repeated is like auto trigger one time, but it'll constantly loop until its conditions are true. This is what I consider as a quasi-parallel event. And auto start synchronize is the parallel event. The thing to remember is that since this option is the parallel event trigger, it automatically starts on each map and runs in the background, checking for various conditions to become true. It is not like RPG Maker's common event where you set up one event that will constantly run in the background, checking for whatever conditions and then triggering and running the event itself. Each map will need a copy of the parallel event to run synchronously across the maps. This is particularly useful for the calendar system I started in a time date tutorial, which I believe was number 8. However, there may be places where you don't want the parallel event to run, so you don't include it on that map. It generally won't run in the background across the maps, so its trigger conditions don't carry over. You simply omit it from the map to prevent its synchronicity, but you can still change switches and variables for use on the maps where the parallel event is set up, as we'll see a bit later. Be careful when using these two triggers, because if you don't have an exit point properly set up, the chances are you won't be able to break out of it when playtesting or during the game. They'll just cycle in an endless loop. Now the other options are ignore elevation, which can be likened to RPG Maker's priority. Briefly, in RPG Maker, below characters means the players can walk on top of events to trigger them. SGB does the same when you uncheck collide with player. RPG Maker's same as characters is the same as having the collide with player checked in SGB. It basically puts a block that doesn't allow movement over it, but which still can be triggered if talked to or touched. And RPG Maker's above characters is basically to trigger events that are over characters' heads, and this is essentially what ignore elevation is. And react from even one step means that events can trigger if the player is one step away from it. Think of it as the event is surrounded by a box, and if the player comes within 1 square of that box, the event triggers. With that out of the way, let's start the tutorial. This is based on something that my friend Sana wanted to do, but it appears that she and many others are encountering a few problems with auto-triggered and parallel events. The basic idea is that you as the player have to set up a meeting with 3 different people from 3 different maps. They'll all then congregate at the house for the meeting to take place. You should be familiar with SGB by now that you don't need a complete step-by-step guide to setting up events, so I'll zip through a few parts and focus more on the triggers themselves. I've already pre-created most of the events to save time. As you'll see, I've changed a few things around on the maps, and I've been experimenting with the G-Style Modern City Resource Pack. I'll put the link to the DLC in this description for anyone who's interested in buying it. The most noticeable change here is obviously on the start map. It's summertime in, you know what? We never did give it a name. If you can think of some names to use for our land, the locations, or even kingdom, put those suggestions in the comments below and I'll start using them. Anyway, I digress. When you place objects, not all of them will have event settings, so you need to create a blank event and manually select the object graphic. So in this case, I've already pre-created one, but as an example, you can change the graphic to whatever you like. In this case, I used G-Style and Post 2. Okay, so the first thing we do when we set up the post box for our mailbox is keep the trigger to talk. We'll change the orientation to left so it faces the path. Then in the display, the postman is late, and here we add a little flourishing touch. Wait 0.3 seconds, move the camera control to first person and have the camera settings to face the path. Again, you can move this around according to your tastes or your desires. And then we switch event 3. We switch the event switch number 3, which I've named postman, to on. And of course at this point, when you check the mailbox again, it'll trigger the postman event again, so we can add a local switch to set to on and another event with the sheet conditions set to local switch. I won't bother with that right now. Okay, and then next we set up another blank event, this time for our postman. Sheet 1, add the condition where the switch number 3 is off, and then we on the second event sheet we do the same, add the condition where the switch number 3 is on and change the graphic. Again, I've used the GS I've used the G-Style graphics, and event orientation is up. This motion, by the way, is set to run. Event orientation up, movement speed is 3, which is the fastest. Movement pattern is approach, i.e. approach the player. Movement frequency is very great, so he's zipping along. Display text. Sorry I'm late, you have a letter. This is display dialogue. In this one I used the bpeople09 because, well, there isn't really a postman graphic, so for some reason this one just reminds me of a postman. Anyway, the character is A01, and then you can copy and paste the dialogue and change it. So the second character comes along. The letter says arrange a meeting with Dirk from the desert, Dirk from Desert Town, Derek from the cave, and Drea from the temple. And I have no idea where those names come from or why they all begin with D. So the postman, make him walk 7 steps down and check pass-through players in events in case he runs into Lisa, who sometimes wanders onto the path, thereby disrupting his routine and throwing him into a complete confused state. And then we can add another camera control for normal view to reset it to the overhead view, turn a local switch on, and then sheet 3 condition is set to local switch and as a blank event. This is just to prevent him from reappearing because the postman switch will remain on. So if we play test it, you can see what will happen. Check the mail. And there he is. Yeah, that crappy movement I believe is a known glitch, one that'll probably be fixed at some point. Sorry I'm late, I have a letter. The letter says, arrange a meeting with Dirk from Desert Town, Derek from the cave, and Drea from the temple. And there you have it. So the Desert Town is the first on the list, so let's head to... I put him in the pub. As you can see, I already pre-created him. He's sitting down. Now, note that because he's sitting down, his event is actually showing above the stool. And this is where ignore elevation comes in. Seated character events are in fact above the player, but positioned below their floor position. Like so. Sitting on a chair, you'll notice that this is the floor and they're just sitting below. That's in order to fit onto the stool. This is actually because the event is stacked on top of the stool object. This is actually to do with object elevation. Again, that's for another time. So back to Dirk. I used the People 15A graphic because he has shades on and he's kind of an assassin dude and just looks cool. Emotion is chair. The orientation is up, so he's facing the bar. And I added 3 sheets. Sheet 1, basically a dialogue. Be people 15-2 because they have shades on. Those shades. That's one cool, slick dude. I really like that one. Anyway, display dialog, he says, what do you want? And then on sheet 2, the graphics are the same as before. This add condition is when the postman has visited, i.e. the switch is on. Then the dialogue switches between the two characters. Your hero speaks first, Dirk, and then Dirk says, yeah, who's asking? And then your character again, you've summoned to a meeting, and then Dirk says, okay again. So, variable 16, which I've named meeting attendees, just basically add to 1. This is to check the number of attendees that have actually been summoned. And finally, we turn the switch on. Dirk, number 16, turned on. And the third event sheet, the condition is Dirk is on, completely blank event. So let's play test this quickly so you can see what I mean, and we'll just add the start point here. What do you want? And that's all he says, because we haven't visited the mail to get the letter from the post office postman. So we can cheat here by bringing up the debug window with F5. Well, it's not really cheating, is it? Basically, we set the postman switch to on, click apply, and then the conversation will ensue. And he disappears. Realistically, he'll run off through the door with a series of move events. But this is a tutorial, so we can skip on that. Next is the cave. So to save a lot of time, we can basically copy and then we can paste it in the cave. I've already created his event. So it's pretty much the same as before. I just changed the graphic to People 14A because it's kind of priesty. And Derek is a timid priest type. So when postman is off, i.e. when the postie hasn't visited, he'll say, I wonder what this switch does. And when it is, the conversation will ensue, 1 will be added to the meeting, and Derek's switch will be turned on. So when Derek's switch is turned on under the conditions, he'll disappear. And finally, we have Drea in the temple doing the same thing, but I just added another template map. This one's Temple 01, and already set up Drea in the same way I did with Dirk and Derek. Just changed all of the relevant details. And in this case, she says, hi there, welcome to the temple. I used the graphic Hero in 8A because that sort of looks like a nun or a priestess or something. And then when the postman's visited, postman switches on, conversation, and as usual, add 1 to the meeting attendees and turn Drea's switch on. And then this time, when Drea's switch is turned on, blank event representing that she's left. So back at the house, we create 3 more events, and again they are set above the stools because they're sitting down. So for Dirk, the first sheet should be blank, and the second sheet is configured, changing the graphics to usual, is configured so that when Dirk's switches on, he will appear as a graphic. And it's the same for the other two. We got Dirk triggered, and then we have Derek triggered, and finally we have Dreyer triggered. And whenever their corresponding switches are turned on, they'll appear here. Okay, let's playtest. What the hell? Oh dear. Eldred is walking. Eldred is walking on air. I must. That's funny. That made my day. I must have moved him by mistake. Actually, I'm going to keep him up there. We're going to have like a little. Put him up there and see what it's like. I'm going to play test. This is going to be funny. So there he is. He's wandering on top of. That's made my day. Anyway. As you can see, no one's around, so we can toggle their switches. Again, F5 for debug. And then we can toggle Dirk on, Derek, and Drea. And there you see, it's weird, kind of weird that they drop down like that. They just sort of materialize out of thin air and then drop onto their stools. They only do that because they're actually above the seats, and you can only stack them on top of the stools. You can't actually put them on top of the stools. But the way it's set up, you won't see this happen because you won't be on this map when the switches are triggered. Okay. So now for the final event. I'm going to move him back down there. Or actually, I'll put him in somewhere out of the way. Put him in a computer room. Anyway, the final event is the auto-run parallel event to check if all three attendees have been summoned. So the first stop is the cave. And then we set up the event like so. It's a new blank sheet. Sheet condition is set to the variable box meeting attendees is equals to 3. And then it's auto run synchronize with the message box. Everyone is ready for the meeting. You can return to the house for it to begin. And then we reset variable 16 meeting attendees, put it back to 0. Otherwise, it will just repeat itself. And we can copy and paste this on the other maps. I've already done that. The next one would be the desert pub, and I've put this somewhere. Oh, there it is. What the hell? What is that? Oh dear God. The perks of being a game developer. You notice all of these things after you've put them down, or midway through something, and then you have to go back, and it's lots of fun. Anyway, this is the same event, auto-triggered if the meeting attendees is equals to 3. And then the final event goes on the temple, which I've put here. Exactly the same thing, just pasted. Okay, and now we're ready for the complete playtest. Obviously we've gone into the cave before and spoken to him. And it'll be the same for the others. They will say their message unless of course you check the mail. So no mail, Posty's late, and he is huffing and puffing and gruffing and coming. So it gives you that letter, and at this point we can go back into the cave. Derek, yes, summoned, go, disappear. And I've done something a little different here, just to expedite things. Desert Town first, and then into the pub. Oh, come on. Yeah. Right, one more to go. So into the temple. And she's disappeared. And this is where our auto-run parallel event kicks in. Everyone's ready for the meeting. You can return to the house for it to begin. So, back to the house we go. And they're all in attendance. And that's it for this tutorial. We used a variety of trigger conditions to achieve the goal of this tutorial. And that brings us to the end. If you found this tutorial useful, give it a like. Subscribe for more videos, and as usual, visit my Twitter, Facebook or blog. Thanks for watching. Until the next time.